Hello again, everyone. Michael Vosbein back with another episode of Drummer Nation. We usually call this trading fours, but we're trading fives today, if there is such a thing. I guess in a 10-bar phrase, you could trade fives. And we're going to do this show on the Bill Evans Trio, and we're delighted to have three drummers with us who played with Bill Evans in the persons of Joe Labarbera, Ed Soph, and Eliot Sigmund. And my erstwhile co-host, Adam Nussbaum, is joining us as well. Thank you, gentlemen. Everybody good?
Yeah.
Well, you know, Joe, I just read your book. It was wonderful about your experiences with Bill. Tell everybody the name of the book.
Times Remembered.
And you can find it where?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookstores, usual sources.
And I got the Kindle. I got the Kindle version. It's wonderful. But you make a point in the beginning of the book where you say the Bill Evans Trio formed a new way of jazz trios coming together and making music. What do you mean by that?
If you listen to any of the jazz trios that were popular around the time that Bill and Scott and Paul got together, you'll hear a noticeable difference stylistically in how they approach the music. Typically, it would be the pianist would be the feature, drums and bass would be doing their usual roles of keeping time, not as much interplay. And that's the big difference between, I think, Bill's trio and all the other ones at that time. They opened the door for this dialogue that started to happen with them naturally. It was just a natural discovery just from playing together. And as time went on, you found that creeping into the way other trios were playing as well. So that's the main difference.
And I imagine Marty Morell told me, another drummer that played with Bill, that's not something that was never discussed on the bandstand, right?
We never talked about it. I don't think Bill talked about the music with any of the guys that he played with.
Eliot?
Yeah, I can certainly agree with that. I think Bill, by the time I got to him, which was fairly late in his career, he had the attitude that if he had to talk to anybody about the music, any of his sidemen, they were probably not the right people to be doing the job. So yeah, we hardly ever talked about the music. We hardly ever rehearsed. And I would say, in a certain way, we hardly ever talked. I mean, I would get to talk to Bill on airplane rides if we were sitting together. But unlike Joe, who had the good fortune of bonding with him, and I think in a way that probably very few musicians who played in the band did, because of the circumstances at the end of his life and living together with Bill for a while. I had, first of all, I was in awe of him, so it was sometimes hard for me to just make, casual conversation with him. But like I said, if we got stuck together on a plane, we would talk, and he told me some interesting stuff about his early period on the road before he joined the trio and how he was treated touring with Miles, and so that was very interesting stuff. But he, at the point I was with him, he was on methadone. He wasn't using cocaine. He wasn't using heroin, and he was pretty introspective, laid back, not really talking a lot. He had the nickname of being a phantom, which after the last set, you'd kind of look around, and more often than not, Bill was gone. And really that was his nickname, the Phantom. He never really hung out, and so that's kind of the way it was. I never got close to him in the way that I would have with a contemporary friend. Like Eddie and I were very, very close. We had a really nice relationship, so that kind of steadied me well with the band.
That's kind of interesting because introspectively in the music, you guys were in each other's minds. You were acting as one, but not necessarily off the bandstand. Any of the stuff with Miles that is relatable?
Some racial stuff, which I'd just as soon not go into. But
Right.
I think he went through a lot of stuff, being the only white guy in the band, and things weren't as open and kind of settled in a way as they are today. In a sense, certainly things aren't settled as we're all seeing, unfortunately. But The race thing back then was a lot rawer than it is now, especially in jazz. And these guys were very, very proud of their music, as they well should have been. And
Well, like Elliot, I was very much in awe. And when I finally got up the nerve to initiate a conversation, um, we were playing at the Vanguard, and he came in, and we were in the back, in the kitchen back there where the hang was, and I said, "How you doing?" And he proceeded to tell me that he had just gotten the news that his first wife had committed suicide. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this man is, Bill did not do small talk. If you asked him something sincerely, he gave you a sincere answer. And that really took me aback because, you're used to saying, you say, "Hey, how you doing?" "Oh man, I'm cool. How you doing?"
Mhm.
He just laid that on me and talked a little bit about her and expressed some regrets. Um, the only other time that, like Elliot said, he was the phantom, and he really didn't socialize that much. Um, I remember him when we played the Vanguard. He actually, this was so out. He actually came over and before the show and apologized to me that the gig paid so little. It was, as I recall, I think it was 5 nights and it was $250. Now, granted, back then, $250 went a lot further, but evidently for the new kid on the block or whatever, or Helen Keane, whatever she decided, that's what I was paid for that week. Other than that, I really I actually had more time conversationally with Eddie than I did with Bill. I was way out of my element um, when I think about it, and I wish I had the opportunity to play with him now because I think I was 29 and oh man, I was in deep water, and
You guys are
I
very humble. Joe says
I
the same thing.
I learned so much. Um, but again, I wish I had a second chance because
Mhm.
at that stage of my playing and personality, I don't really think I did justice to his music, but I sure learned a lot trying.
Well, I tried to hear all the great jazz players that crossed paths in my lifetime, and I never got to hear Bill Evans. One time he was playing up the street. We all got off the gig early and ran up to the club, and we just missed him. But Adam, I know you heard the band, right?
I heard the band many times. I heard them with I heard them with Elliot. I heard them with Marty. I heard them with Joe, and it was always a treat. And I remember I even they were auditioning drummers at the Vanguard. I think it was maybe before you got the gig, Joe. And I found out after the fact that they were auditioning, and I asked Bill. I said, "Man, I'd love to come and get a chance to play with you." And he said, "Well, you have to talk to Helen and all this." And, I was just always trying to get out wherever I could. And like Ed said, I would have been way out of my league. But I always found that jumping in deep water, I learned how to swim.
Hmm.
So it was he was very cordial, he was very nice. I heard him many times. I actually heard him the last night that he played at Fat Tuesdays, and that was something, and he played wonderfully. And it was I think it was true that that trio and the way that music evolved created a new template for the way people would improvise as a collective group and things like that, which I think stemmed a lot from where things were at with Scotty and, Bill utilizing Scotty and Paul being able to get in there. They had a wonderful chemistry.
He's
And
talking about Scott LaFaro, the bass player who
Scott
died
LaFaro.
tragically early, and Paul Motion, the drummer.
Right. And, it was, I always enjoyed hearing Bill. It was always a treat. It's ironic, but like so many people in this world, the music is so together and life is what's difficult
Right.
along the way.
Can I interject something? Bill had a very wry sense of humor, and after I had been with the trio, I was working around town, and I worked with a singer named Sylvia Sims, and Michael Moore was playing bass, and Micah Benny playing piano. So you're in trouble right there with those two cats. So we're we were doing a club in New York called, I think it's called the Carousel or something like that. And we're back in the dressing room with Sylvia, just, hanging out. And who comes in but Bill and his wife, second wife. And Sylvia immediately starts complaining to Bill. She says, this trio, and of course we're sitting there. She goes, this trio, I can't get, they don't play the same thing every night. I mean, every night they play something different behind me. And
That's kind of the point.
Bill looked at her and said, Sylvia, I've got the solution. And she goes, what? He says, record the trio the way you want them to play, and then on your gigs, play the tape and they can pretend like they're playing behind you.
That's great.
And I heard the trio with Dejanette after I'd been down and they were playing at the Village Gate. And Jack took a solo. I think it was on Nardis. And it was obviously, it was incredible. And when it was over and the tune was over, Bill walked up to the microphone and said, ladies and gentlemen, you just witnessed the second Rite of Spring.
Well, the whole jazz thing, I think it was Dizzy initially said we never play anything the same way once, right? But I remember when Ray Charles was a spokesman for, I think it was Pepsi, he had trouble with, they'd shoot something 4, 5, 6 times, and he could never sing it the same way twice. Mm-hmm. That's to his credit, I would think. In this world, I'm speaking to maybe some younger players who aren't as jazz aware, that the improvisation and originality is what the key is. I mean, that's what everybody's going for. But let's drill down a little bit on the differences in the style, because it's one thing to say it got more free, but if we look back at the history of jazz music, it all happened together, right? I mean, when the bass player wasn't walking, that's opened up freedom for the drummer. You know what I mean? As like in the bebop era or before that, and you might have started with 4 on the bass drum and dang, 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 and maybe 2 and 4 on the hi-hat. And then as it progressed, all the other instruments opened up, and the drummers did too. So that by the time you were with Bill, there wasn't anything that was a constant. Is that correct? Or am I wrong? Tell me.
But I'm going to ask Joe and Eliot. Did Bill ever tell you that Philly Joe was his favorite drummer?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Definitely said that to me for sure.
So that always is interesting because from my standpoint, the conversation was largely between Bill and in my time Eddie. And even going back and listening with the trio with Scotty and Bill could do what they did because Paul pretty much stayed at home. He didn't play in a really an aggressive manner. He would break the time up, but not the extreme as some people try to make it. Because if the drummer gets as loose as the bassist, then there's no glue or what's the word I want? Contrast. because if the freedom isn't apparent unless somebody is in the trio is not playing with the same degree of freedom. Does that make any sense?
That's a good point. What do you guys think?
Somebody has to hold the fort.
Paul kept his hi-hat on 2 and 4. He didn't break it up.
Mm-hmm.
Ride pattern, if anything, was the part that changed. It wasn't like Philly Joe's, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Let me jump in here.
Yeah, please.
When I was researching the book, one of the things I discovered from the earlier interviews is that Bill thought initially he was going to be a solo piano player. He wanted that freedom of being able to move, change keys if he felt like it, or maybe stay on a chord for a while if he was feeling that, without hanging up another musician, because there's no way you could know in advance. So with that concept in the back of his head, I think it was something that he was always striving for with a band, but maybe they didn't verbalize it. But that's exactly what they ended up with, right? I mean, that kind of flexibility with a trio to be able to move, in a certain direction without anything being said, and just following cues from each other. And another thing that was telling for me was that I know exactly what Eliot was talking about with what Bill was feeling, the frustrations of being the kind of the outlier in Miles's quintet. But ultimately, he didn't want to play that way, and that's, I think, the main reason he made that decision to leave the band. After 9 months, you got the best job in jazz, and you hand in your notice. So there were a couple of things that worked there, and the good news for all of us is that he found Scott and Paul, and they were able to make those discoveries.
Good point. Eliot?
I kind of want to add something to that, that I felt as he got older. I remember one of the conversations we had on a plane was he was telling me, we both went to Manus College, so we were talking about that. He's telling me he reached a point at Manus where he had to make a decision whether he's become a classical musician, either a composer or a pianist or a jazz musician. And obviously he chose jazz, but I think unlike maybe many jazz pianists, I'm sure all young pianists studied classical music to a certain extent. I think Bill was really, really involved in classical music. And as he matured, I felt that he became more formalistic. Oh, I always viewed his most successful concerts when I was with the band as almost like piano recitals that would be given in a music room, in the 18th century or something. There was something very formal about his presentation. And on a lot of the tunes, especially the medium tunes or the ballads, he would, he never just played tunes off the top of his head, as a lot of cats like to do. So they'll play the melody different ways. They'll, the opening chorus will be, kind of almost like an improvisation on, but yet Bill, he had a specific arrangement for pretty much every tune he played, very, very formal. And you knew immediately when he started those introductions which tune that was going to be. And in some of the cases also, his improvised solos would vary very little from night to night. So I always felt as he grew older, his link to classical music became much, much stronger. I mean, when I was with the band, there were certain tunes where you knew he would open up and there might be a long drum solo, but a lot of the tunes fell into that pattern. He would take one or two choruses, then he would hand it over to Eddie, and Eddie would be the one that would really kind of just change from night to night. And Bill was very set. And it was interesting because a couple of weeks ago, I was just listening to WBGO, like on the radio or something, and a track came on with Miles and Bill. I think it was Love for Sale. And for like most of one chorus, I didn't know who the piano player was for a second. He had a great touch and great articulation, but he wasn't playing any of the kind of things that I associate with Bill. And then in the second and third choruses, I started to recognize things. But his time feel back then was completely different. I mean, it was amazing to me to listen to because, I dealt with his time feel for 3 years. And so it was fascinating. So, I believe in the beginning, to agree with everybody about the change in trio, and it wasn't just a change terms of the freedom of the bass player and the more openness, but I mean, harmonically, he changed the world back then. I can remember talking to people in that period of time where, they say, well, what do you want to play? You want to play the changes to the tune, or you want to play the Bill Evans? I mean,
Mm.
harmonized every tune, and it became in jazz, I would say for a good, whatever, 3 to 5 years, it was new, and everybody wanted to know what Bill was playing, how he played that tune, how he harmonized that tune. And like I said, in all my experience through the years, and I've played with some great piano players, nobody had quite that kind of formalistic, uh, those tunes, the introduction to Autumn Leaves or the introduction to Nardis, or, all these tunes I can think of we used to play where I immediately knew what we were going to play. There was no question. And the melody might vary a little bit, but very little. So I felt as he got older, his link to classical music became much, much stronger. And maybe in a certain way with the trio with Joe and Mark, it exploded a little bit and things started to get shaken up again. And had he lived, perhaps a new direction might have evolved, a new path forward might have continued and really changed his playing.
That's a good perspective because we think of him as free and liberating, but it's very firmly rooted.
If you listen to some of the early Bill, like when he was doing some recordings with Art Farmer or Eddie Costa or things like that, or Jazz in the Space Age, things like that, he's got another kind of more bebop oriented time feel.
Yeah,
And,
Hmm.
as time came, as things moved and progressed, I guess after Miles, and then, really, I think it started to really, maybe Scotty was a catalyst, or it was, who's to say what it was, but it's just fascinating to hear his evolution.
yeah,
And, his harmonic and, sense was, I mean, always influenced by the European tradition. And I mean, I just remember listening as time went on to all the different versions of Nardis, where he would take this, long solo up front, and it was like concertos. It was incredible.
yeah.
And it was always fascinating to hear, how an artist, evolves over time. Bill Evans in 62, 61 was not the same as 1956 or 58. And then, of course, the times that, I heard him with Eliot and Joe, it was always shifting. But I guess what you're saying, is night to night, he kind of had a schematic in mind for how he was going to approach things.
Definitely. And we also had a concert set that he very strictly adhered to. When I was with him, he would always, and the last whatever, 15, 20 years of his life, he would always do records with other people as an interest in wanting to play with them, but also to sell records too. He had a lot of trio records on the market, and there was pressure to do things with other people. But he never went out with more than a trio, and his own trio. He never varied the guys. So that was curious to me too, that you would think an artist of that stature would do the occasional tour with whoever it was that he loved to play with. But he was very, very strict in just adhering to his performance with the trio, which was a great thing as well. But not, most cats that are out there will occasionally do a tour with somebody else, do some kind of a collective thing with somebody else.
What would you guys? Well, let's cover some of the drummers that aren't here that played with Bill. I know we talked about Paul Motion. There's some great stuff with Shelley too.
Larry Bunker.
Larry Bunker. Uh,
Yeah.
Joe
um,
Hunt actually was
Joe
with him
Hunt.
for a spell. I wish I could have heard that trio because I think Joe would have done a great job in that trio.
Yeah, yeah.
Trio was that?
With Joe Hunt with Bill, did you ever hear Joe with him, Elliot?
I never heard him live. No.
Marty, the aforementioned Marty Morell. Anyway, a litany of great, great drummers who came through that group. Everybody learned. What would you guys, Ed? What would you say you learned from working with it, Bill? A core thing.
To think of thinking of what I shouldn't have played. Learning how to use space.
Mm-hmm.
which is a simple phrase, but the implications, as we all know, are massive.
Especially as drummers, because we don't have to stop playing to breathe.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
Phrasing and not necessarily playing the drums, but playing the music.
Joe?
Commitment. I mean, he had such a solid commitment to the music and to what was happening in the moment. It was unwavering at all times. I mean, we would be into an artist, for example, and he'd be doing his introduction, and his glasses would be like sliding down his nose because his nose was wet with sweat, and I'm thinking they're going to go, you know, and without even shifting anything, his hand would fly up with the first finger and push the glasses all the way back up and continue to be like deeply, deeply into what he was doing. It was like that didn't even register. That was automatic.
I know you tell a story about him getting in a car wreck and having a gig at Carnegie Hall, and he shows up with his arm in a sling 15 minutes before the gig, walks out very gingerly, has a gasp in the audience. He takes his arm out of the sling, plays his ass off.
Yeah.
That's some commitment. That's some intensity.
Yeah.
Eliot?
Yeah. I learned a lot about form. I mean, how to solo on form. My first gig with the band after he called me to work with him was a tour of Europe. And the first concert on the tour was big concert, thousands of people in Switzerland. And the first tune we played was My Romance. And the first soloist on the first tune of the first gig I did with Bill was the drums. So, you know, I was 30 years old, kind of the same age as Ed, more or less, when he was playing with Bill. And my first real big time jazz gig, I'm out on the stage and I'm having to play, 2 or 3 choruses of My Romance and make sure and, it was trial by fire.
Trial by fire.
Oh, man.
I worked as an X-ray tech for about 10 years, and I compare it to what it felt like the first time I went to an operating room with an X-ray machine. And it was one of the scariest things in my life. And I came through it, I ended up keeping the gig, but boy, and just in general, Bill was such a master of form. So, trading 4s, trading 8s, knowing where you are in the chorus, hearing where you are in the chorus all the time. And also at that point in my life, just being able to hear the chord changes of the tune as I was soloing, that became so much more a stronger part of my playing with having worked with Bill for those years and Eddie. So
that's interesting because most drummers think of melody when they're soloing.
Yeah.
To try to keep the form, but you're thinking harmonically as well.
Yeah, the harmonic thing is much stronger for me at this point, and always has been actually. So I think in a way, it's easier to get lost on the form if you're thinking of melody. Whereas if you're actually hearing the chord progressions inside you, it really helps.
That's a good point. I've never heard anybody express that.
Harmonic rhythm.
Harmonic rhythm.
Yeah. Adam, anything you want to tag in with this?
Well, it's just wonderful to see you gentlemen. And, I feel like I'm the big fly on the wall. So I'm just happy to see everybody and grateful that everybody's here. And, Bill's trio, that concept, it changed and had such an effect. And I think of the people that came after, people that were affected. Paul Bley, kind of a contemporary, but also had something going on. Then later on, people like Keith and stuff like that. It's just interesting to hear the development and
Herbie, of course, yeah.
Well, yeah, but the way the whole thing has kind of shifted and opened up other zones. Another drummer I was wondering about, who I know played with Bill for a minute, was Arnie Weiss.
Yeah, right.
And I wondered, what it ever happened to him, or bunch of people along the way that kind of have a short, presence on the scene, and then you wonder what happens. I mean, in Grady Tate is on that great record, Bill with the symphony orchestra, right?
Yeah.
That's
That's a,
Grady, right?
yeah.
Well, we've been talking the Bill Evans Trio from the drummer's perspective. There's plenty of dissertations and books and college courses about Bill Evans, but not usually from this perspective. And we've had three great drummers who were with Bill: Joe Labarbera, Ed Soph, and Eliot Sigmund, and another world-class jazz drummer, Adam Nussbaum, with some great insight into the Bill Evans Trio from the drummer's perspective. Anybody want to tag anything onto that?
Yeah, I got one thing.
Please.
When I joined the trio, Bill handed me this velour suit that used to belong to Elliot. And it was, first of all, it was, how tall are you, Elliot?
6 feet.
Because, I mean, this thing was huge on me. I was swimming in it. And it was like wearing a blanket. I don't know if you remember those outfits, man, but they were so hot. We
Yeah.
went out, we went out and played a gig on them. And that was the one time I spoke. I said, man, no way, we can't wear these anymore. They're too hot. So we all ended up driving over to Sims in New Jersey, and we're all running around the place finding what we want to wear. And you wouldn't believe the difference in opinions, but we finally narrowed it down to something. But I always remember that velour suit of yours, Elliot.
It's funny you would remember that. You know, Shaughnessy, after he finished the Tonight Show, had in his contract wherever he went that he didn't have to wear a tie because he wore it every night on the Tonight Show for however many years he did that. And that's kind of what sticks in your head after all this time is, what do we have to wear? Anyway, I used to sub at Disneyland, and I used to have to wear the craziest stuff. And I'd say, man, this gig's great as long as you don't look in the mirror. Anyway, thank you, gentlemen, for a nice discussion on Bill Evans. And if you like the show, please hit that subscribe button and check for us next time. We'll be coming at you a couple of times a month. Appreciate you all. Thank you very much.